What if some of the greatest war films of the 60s were not the ones you've already seen, but the ones time quietly buried? Imagine reels of forgotten bravery lost in smoke and celluloid. Stories too bold or too bleak for an era still licking its wounds. Tonight we reopen those archives. These are 12 60s war films you've never seen, but every one of them still burns with brilliance. Number 12. The Long and the Short and the Tall, 1961. When it first marched into cinemas, this British war drama divided everyone who saw it. Some called it a claustrophobic masterpiece. Others called it unpatriotic. Set during the Malayan Campaign, it traps a small patrol of British soldiers deep in the jungle, surrounded by silence, humidity, and fear. The enemy is invisible. The true battle is between conscience and command. The film strips away the glory of warfare, replacing it with the slow collapse of men forced to confront their own morality. Lawrence Harvey gives one of his most unsettling performances as Sergeant Mitchum, a leader cracking under pressure, while Richard Harris steals scenes as a soldier questioning every order. But what turned audiences uneasy was its honesty. Released when Britain was still proud of its empire, the film dared to show soldiers as flawed and frightened, not heroic and clean. Some theaters refused to screen it. Military groups accused the filmmakers of undermining discipline. Newspapers branded it defeatist. Behind the scenes, tensions mirrored the story. Harvey and Harris reportedly despised each other, clashing on set just as their characters did in the jungle. That hostility became cinematic electricity. The studio nearly shelved the film, fearing public backlash, but it slipped quietly into release, and critics later hailed it as ahead of its time. It vanished from circulation for decades, yet those who rediscovered it on late-night television saw something timeless, a portrait of war as quiet madness. The kind of story too raw for parades, too human to forget. Number 11. Hell is for Heroes, 1962. Before Steve McQueen became a legend, this film made him dangerous. It was a box office disappointment in its day, yet its spirit shaped every gritty war movie that came after. Set in the closing months of World War II, it follows a tiny American squad ordered to hold a position against overwhelming German forces. The men are exhausted, demoralized, and forgotten by command. McQueen plays Reese, a soldier, stripped of sentiment and nearly stripped of sanity. He fights not for country, but for survival. The film rejects Hollywood's polished heroics. There is no sweeping music, no victory march. Only mud exhaustion and the slow erosion of reason. The controversy came quickly. Paramount executives demanded more optimism, more clarity. Director Don Siegel refused. McQueen refused. They delivered a film that ends not in triumph, but tragedy. Critics called it too bleak for audiences still craving patriotic comfort. Some theaters pulled it within weeks. Behind the camera, it was chaos. Siegel's crew faced freezing weather in California, mountain locations meant to pass for France. The budget collapsed. McQueen fought with producers. And yet, through all that, Hell is for Heroes became a blueprint for the modern anti-war film. You can trace its DNA in Platoon Saving Private Ryan and even The Thin Red Line. For decades it lived as a cult secret passed between veterans who said it came closer to the truth than any medal ceremony ever did. Watch it now, and you can feel that truth. The silence between gunfire, the weight behind McQueen's eyes, the knowledge that sometimes hell is not the battlefield, it's what remains afterward. Number 10. The Train, 1964. John Frankenheimer's. The Train was a logistical nightmare turned masterpiece. Critics once dismissed it as another action war picture. They were wrong. Beneath its explosions lies one of cinema's most intellectual debates about art culture and sacrifice. Burt Lancaster plays a French resistance leader fighting to stop a Nazi colonel from stealing priceless artworks bound for Germany in the final days of the occupation. The film's tension is not just physical, but moral. What is worth more lives or legacy? Production nearly derailed when Lancaster demanded more action scenes, while Frankenheimer wanted philosophical depth. The compromise produced cinematic gold. Every explosion was real, every train derailment practical. The crew risked their lives to capture authenticity that today's CGI could never fake. At release, some critics called it irresponsible spectacle. Others accused it of glorifying destruction. The The French government even hesitated to support it, fearing it made the resistance appear reckless. But audiences who discovered it later saw its brilliance. The Train became a meditation on humanity's obsession with beauty amid barbarism. Its legacy crept quietly through the decades, influencing directors from Spielberg to Nolan. It taught that war stories could be both thrilling and thoughtful, and for all its chaos, the final moments speak louder than gunfire. A man standing among corpses beside crates of paintings, realizing that art might survive, but innocence never does. Number 9. The Bedford Incident, 1965. Cold War paranoia meets moral collapse in this underappreciated gem, starring Richard Widmark and Sidney Poitier. When it premiered, critics didn't know how to categorize it. Was it a war film or a psychological thriller? The truth is, it was both. Set aboard a U.S. destroyer chasing a Soviet submarine in icy northern waters, it captures the suffocating tension of command gone mad. Widmark plays Captain Finlander, a man obsessed with military perfection to the point of self-destruction. Poitier portrays a journalist trapped on board, chronicling what begins as routine patrol and spirals into an accidental apocalypse. There are no gunfights or heroics. Only claustrophobia, rising dread, and the realization that one human error could end the world. The controversy was immediate, released during the height of nuclear anxiety. The Bedford incident mirrored real fears of accidental war. The Pentagon distanced itself from the production. The U.S. Navy refused to cooperate. Television stations even delayed broadcasts, claiming it was too grim for family viewing. Behind the scenes, tensions simmered. Widmark reportedly stayed in character between takes, creating unease on set. Poitier later admitted the atmosphere left him haunted long after filming ended. Director James B. Harris fought with producers who wanted a more optimistic ending, but refused. The result is one of the most chilling final minutes in any 60s film. Over time, the Bedford incident vanished from conversation, overshadowed by flashier Cold War spectacles. Yet, modern audiences who rediscovered it on streaming call it prophetic. It predicted not just nuclear fear, but the moral numbness of endless vigilance. A story that whispers the quiet terror of men who mistake obedience for courage and precision for mercy. Number 8. The Hill, 1965. Before Sean Connery became immortal as Bond, he gave perhaps his greatest performance in The Hill, a brutal anti-war prison drama directed by Sidney Lumet. Set in a British military prison in North Africa, the story follows soldiers punished not for cowardice, but for disobedience. The punishment is a literal hill of sand they must climb endlessly under the desert sun. At first glance, it seems like another soldier's story. But beneath the sweat and screams lies a study of power corruption and the slow annihilation of dignity. Connery's character, Sergeant Roberts, refuses to break. The officers running the prison refuse to bend. It becomes a war within a war. The film shocked British censors. The violence was not graphic, but psychological. Authorities feared it portrayed the army as sadistic and unjust. Some called for cuts. Lumet refused. British troops stationed overseas reportedly protested its release, calling it an insult. Even so, it won the Grand Prix at Cannes, though it never found wide distribution. Behind the camera, Connery risked everything. He was still under contract with Eon Productions, who saw the film as career suicide. The shoot was punishing. Temperatures hit 120 degrees. Several crew members collapsed. Lumet shot with handheld cameras and natural light, creating a documentary realism decades ahead of its time. Over the years, The Hill became a cult treasure, rediscovered by directors like Kubrick and Nolan, who praised its use of geometry, sound, and moral tension. It remains one of the few war films without a single battle, yet every frame feels like one. Its message still cuts deep. Sometimes the greatest acts of war happen within the human spirit itself. Number 7. Play Dirty, 1969. By the late 60s, audiences were weary of noble war heroes. Play Dirty blew up the myth completely. Directed by André de Toth and starring Michael Caine, it told a story so cynical, studios nearly refused to distribute it. The plot follows a team of British misfits sent across the North African desert to sabotage German fuel depots. But nothing goes as planned. Betrayal, treachery, and corporate greed replace loyalty. Caine plays Captain Douglas, a reluctant soldier who learns the mission is not about valor, but oil. Nigel Davenport's mercenary character steals every scene with his brutal pragmatism. The film's tone is dry, sunburned, and fatalistic. Every frame is drenched in sand and suspicion. Censors hated it. Critics called it amoral. The British military refused to cooperate, claiming it undermined the war effort's memory. Even Michael Caine admitted the studio panicked after early screenings when test audiences left in silence. The marketing department tried to sell it as adventure, but viewers quickly realized it was something darker. Behind the scenes, things were just as chaotic. De Toth clashed with producers over budget cuts and rewrites. Some sequences were filmed in actual minefields. Crew members quit mid-shoot. And yet the result was hauntingly authentic. Its ending, one of the bleakest in war cinema, stunned even seasoned critics. Play Dirty disappeared quickly from theaters, but found resurrection decades later when younger filmmakers praised its honesty. Quentin Tarantino once cited it as an influence for its raw depiction of moral rot. Watching it now feels like staring into the mirror of modern warfare, where profit overshadows purpose, and no one walks away clean. Number 6. King and Country, 1964. When most war films of the 60s glorified bravery, King and Country dared to portray cowardice as tragedy. Directed by Joseph Losey, this bleak British drama unfolds during the First World War inside a muddy military prison. Tom Courtenay plays Private Hamp, a soldier accused of desertion. Dirk Bogarde plays the officer assigned to defend him. What begins as a trial becomes an autopsy of conscience. The story unfolds in suffocating close-ups drenched in rain and despair. Hamp is no villain. He is simply a man broken by endless shellfire and loss. Yet military law demands blood, not mercy. The film exposes how war turns compassion into weakness and obedience into execution. Upon release, it divided critics. Some praised its courage, others condemned it as treasonous. British tabloids accused Losey of anti-patriotism. The War Office refused cooperation. American distributors nearly banned it, fearing outrage from veterans groups. The film premiered quietly at the Venice Film Festival, where it won awards but never achieved wide release. Behind the scenes, Losey battled the censors relentlessly. He insisted that the firing squad sequence remain unflinching. Bogarde later confessed that shooting the final scene left him in tears and nearly ended his career. The dialogue was minimal. The silence said everything. Decades later, King and Country resurfaced through late-night retrospectives. Modern audiences finally recognized its moral weight. The film predicted the psychological realism of later anti-war cinema and revealed the cruelty hidden behind discipline. Watching it now feels like hearing the heartbeat of every forgotten soldier executed for fear, not betrayal. Its question still echoes through time. What kind of country demands death from its broken sons? Number 5. The Thin Red Line, 1964. Before Terrence Malick reinvented the title in the 90s, there was this little-known original directed by Andrew Martin. Based on James Jones's novel, it was filmed on location in the Pacific with real veterans advising the crew. The result was gritty, sun-bleached, and disturbingly intimate. The plot follows an infantry company during the battle for Guadalcanal. There are no grand speeches, only exhaustion, confusion, and flashes of madness. Keir Dullea plays a soldier caught between duty and despair, while Jack Warden portrays an officer haunted by the futility of his orders. The film's realism shocked audiences who expected heroism and found horror. Censors intervened before release, demanding cuts to its graphic battle imagery and bleak dialogue. Martin reluctantly trimmed several minutes, but refused to add a victory ending. Studio executives shelved it for months, believing the public would reject its despair. When it finally appeared, it was overshadowed by glossier titles like The Great Escape and Zulu. Behind the camera, Martin's crew faced genuine danger. Explosions misfired. Extras suffered burns. The set was plagued by tropical storms that destroyed equipment. Yet out of chaos came authenticity. Veterans who saw it privately said it was the closest thing to their memories of real combat. For decades, the film vanished until Malick's later masterpiece revived curiosity. Scholars now view the 1964 version as a raw spiritual ancestor to the modern anti-war narrative. Its closing shot, a wounded soldier staring at the indifferent sky, reminds us that the battlefield is not always a place of glory. Sometimes it is the last mirror of our humanity. Number 4. The Bridge at Remagen, 1969. Filmed on the border of Czechoslovakia during one of the tensest moments of the Cold War, this American-German production was nearly shut down by tanks before it even finished shooting. Directed by John Guillermin, it dramatizes the real battle for the Ludendorff Bridge, the last crossing over the Rhine in March 1945. The film opens with George Segal leading a weary American unit ordered to seize the bridge before the Germans destroy it. But the story avoids flag-waving triumph. Instead, it portrays both sides as human beings desperate to survive the war's dying days. Robert Vaughn plays the German major torn between orders and conscience. Trouble began when the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia interrupted filming. The crew fled overnight, leaving tanks and props behind. Western headlines claimed the production caused political scandal. Paramount feared losing millions. Guillermin rebuilt sets in Austria and finished under constant surveillance from both NATO and Warsaw Pact agents. Critics were baffled. Some admired its realism. Others accused it of sympathizing with the enemy. American audiences largely ignored it, believing it too grim. Yet soldiers returning from Vietnam called it the first film that truly understood exhaustion, the futility of endless missions, and the thin line between victory and survival. Over the years, The Bridge at Remagen grew into a cult artifact of Cold War filmmaking. Its documentary style and moral ambiguity inspired later classics like A Bridge Too Far. Today it feels eerily modern, a film born from chaos about chaos. A story reminding us that even when wars end, their bridges never really close. Number 3. The Victors, 1963. The Victors is the war film Hollywood tried to forget. Written and directed by Carl Foreman, the blacklisted writer of High Noon, it shattered every illusion about glory, patriotism, and victory. Running nearly 3 hours, the film follows a squad of Allied soldiers through Europe, not as heroes, but as fractured souls crushed by moral decay. At its release, audiences were stunned. There were no triumphal fanfares, no grand speeches. Instead, the victors offered vignettes of cruelty, loneliness, and disillusion. One haunting scene shows soldiers forced to witness the execution of a deserter on Christmas Eve while carols play in the background. It was too much for a public still clinging to post-war pride. American censors demanded cuts, especially to scenes depicting soldiers looting and fraternizing with civilians. British critics accused Foreman of cynicism, bordering on treason. Columbia Pictures panicked, slashing promotional budgets and pulling it from theaters after a brief run. Behind the scenes, Foreman was uncompromising. Still scarred from his blacklist years, he made the film as revenge against hypocrisy. He refused to glorify any flag. The production was massive, filmed across 6 countries, and filled with young stars like George Peppard, Eli Wallach, and Peter Fonda. But the studio resented its bleak tone and its refusal to offer catharsis. Over the decades, The Victors became a ghost story, whispered by film historians. Lost reels were rediscovered in archives, revealing a version even darker than the original release. Modern critics now hail it as one of the first anti-war epics to strip away the romance of combat, a film that dared to say, there are no victors, only survivors, and the memories that haunt them. Number 2. The Americanization of Emily, 1964. In an era when patriotism was sacred, The Americanization of Emily committed cinematic heresy. Written by Patty Chayefsky and starring James Garner and Julie Andrews, it was the first major Hollywood film to call heroism itself a lie. Its charm disguised its fury, a dark satire wrapped in a romance. Garner plays Lieutenant Commander Charlie Madison, a Navy officer who proudly avoids combat. He supplies luxury goods to admirals and believes war is insanity, not honor. Julie Andrews plays Emily, a war widow, clinging to faith in heroism. Their love story becomes a philosophical battle about what bravery truly means. The controversy was immediate. Critics called it un-American. Veterans groups demanded boycotts. The Navy refused to lend equipment. One congressman denounced it on the House floor as moral sabotage. Chayefsky refused to apologize, calling it a comedy about sanity in an insane world. Behind the scenes, the film nearly collapsed under tension. Director Arthur Hiller clashed with MGM executives who wanted more romance and less rebellion. Garner, furious at being labeled unpatriotic, doubled down on the performance of his career, cool, cynical, yet heartbreakingly human. Though it earned some critical praise, the public wasn't ready. It vanished quietly after release, but gained new life during the Vietnam era, when soldiers found in it a voice of rare honesty. Today its dialogue feels prophetic. We shall honor the dead by teaching the living to hate war. That line, once mocked, now feels like a message whispered across generations, a warning still waiting to be heard. Number 1. The Pawnbroker, 1964. While not set on the battlefield, The Pawnbroker may be the most devastating war film of its time because it explores what happens after the guns fall silent. Directed by Sidney Lumet and starring Rod Steiger, it tells the story of Sol Nazerman, a Holocaust survivor running a pawn shop in Harlem, trapped between past horrors and present decay. The film unfolds like a nightmare in daylight. Sol's memories of the camps invade his everyday life, flashes of barbed wire, screams, and loss. He becomes emotionally dead, a man whose soul remains imprisoned, though the war has ended. At release, it was revolutionary. No film had ever dared show Holocaust trauma with such raw intensity. American censors tried to block it over its brief moments of nudity and its brutal flashbacks. Religious groups protested, calling it obscene. Yet Lumet and Steiger refused to cut a frame. The Motion Picture Association eventually relented, marking the birth of a new freedom in American cinema. Behind the camera, Lumet shot in real Harlem locations, blending documentary realism with expressionist pain. Steiger immersed himself in silence, refusing to speak between takes to stay within the character's isolation. Crew members reportedly wept during filming. The Pawnbroker received an Oscar nomination, but remained too heavy for mass audiences. Still, its influence rippled outward. Scorsese, Coppola, and countless others studied it as the film that proved cinema could bear witness to trauma without spectacle. In the end, The Pawnbroker isn't about battles or medals. It's about survival's quiet agony, the kind of war story that doesn't end when the fighting stops, but when the heart finally forgets how to feel. These forgotten 60s war films dared to confront truths most audiences weren't ready to face. They spoke of courage, stripped of glory, of survival, stripped of pride. They disappeared into vaults waiting for a generation ready to listen. Which one shocked you most? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more rediscovered legends.